Hey, this is John Mark. Welcome to our third installment of our Heaven Matters series. Today we look at the beautiful chapter in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 21. If you've ever heard someone say, "I've read the end of the book and we win." Well, the reality of it is we're almost at the end of the book. Revelation chapter 21 is one chapter before the end of the book. And let me tell you, what we read in Revelation 21 about heaven is beyond our mind's capabilities to perceive it and understand it and even imagine it. When I think about Revelation chapter 21, I really think about Christmas gifts. My guess is if you were a little like me and you were inquisitive around Christmas time, there would be times when you knew as you were approaching that Christmas morning that your parents had probably bought your presents. And you went and took a sneak peek, just a quick look. Maybe they were piled back in the back of the closet, or maybe the boxes weren't quite wrapped, and you would just take a sneak peek of what you were going to get that Christmas morning. Revelation 21 is that sneak peek where God just tells us a little bit of what the new heaven and the new earth is going to be like. And as I think about Revelation 21, I think of the words that we oftentimes see in the back of children's books, which say, "And they lived happily ever after." And that's really what Revelation 21 is about, reminding us that there's coming a day that we will live happily ever after. Listen to what John said in Revelation chapter 21. He said, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." That word new in the Greek is kainos. It means it's not just new in the sense that it comes after something else, but that word kainos means it's qualitatively better. In other words, this earth is way better that God is creating in Revelation chapter 21 than the one we live in. This heaven is way better even than the heaven that Christ is living in now with the saints who have passed away, that He has prepared for them. This is brand new. And then He says there's no longer any sea. We think about our current world. We are a water-based society. We live in a water-based environment. 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered by water. Our bodies, I think 65 to 70% of our bodies are made up of water. Our blood, some 90% of our blood is water. In other words, without water, we die because we live in a water-based environment. However, this new heaven and new earth, it's a God-based environment. It is a glory-based environment, and we don't need water. We don't need rain. We don't need lakes. They just won't be there. And then notice what else He says. "And I saw a holy city, the new Jerusalem." There's that same word again, a qualitatively better Jerusalem than the one we have now and know now. And He goes, "coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed or adorned for her husband." And ladies, you'll love that word adorned. It is the Greek word kosmeo. It's the Greek word we get our English word cosmetics from. In other words, man, this new Jerusalem is so beautiful, it's so dolled up by God, if you want to put it that way, that when we eventually lay our eyes on it, we are going to be shocked with amazement of the beauty. If you're like me, we can remember, if you're married, I can remember standing at the altar that day, looking to the back of the building and watching those doors come open as Gina began to walk down the aisle. And I was just amazed at her beauty. And He's saying, listen, when we see the new heaven and new earth, we're going to have that same sense of amazement. That is just a foretaste and a forethought of our living happily ever after, eternally happily ever after. And then He goes on and He says, God's going to be with us. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 3, He says, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne say, 'Look.'" In other words, John says, man, the voice from the throne said, "Look at what's about to take place." It says God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. I love that word that says God made His dwelling place with the people. In other words, we're going to see God face to face, finally. We're going to see God face to face. That word dwelling place is a beautiful Greek word, which means God's going to be with us and we're going to dwell with God. The other place that John uses that word dwell, that same Greek word dwell, is found over in John chapter 1, where in John chapter 1, it says this, beginning in verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, talking about Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then verse 14 says, and the Word made His dwelling place with us in human flesh. In other words, Jesus, who was the fullness of God, came to humanity. So fully God, fully man, Jesus made His dwelling with us. And John in Revelation chapter 21 says, the new heaven and the new earth, and God will dwell with us for all of eternity. The next thing that John says is, there'll be no more. Listen to what John says beginning in verse 4. He says, and God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There'll be no longer any death or mourning or crying or pain. Why? Because the old imperfect things, the sinful things will have passed away. And then it says, and He who sits on the throne says, I am making everything brand new. And then I love these next few words. He says, and then he said, write this down, John. These words are trustworthy and true. What an incredible thought that John sees this new heaven and new earth, conveys it to us that it is qualitatively better, but not just qualitatively better in its architecture or craftsmanship, but in the fact that there'll be no longer any sad days, nothing to worry about, nothing to be fearful about, nothing to cry about, no more bad hair days, no more getting on the scale and being concerned about what it says. Those are the little things that make us discouraged. Nothing to be worried about. Beyond that, no death to mourn over, because all of those things are going to go away. There'll be no more. Now that is new. And the beautiful thing is, you say, is that really going to happen? God says, write this down. These words are trustworthy and true. And then the last thing he says in verse 6 and verse 7, he says, for those who are believers, this new heaven and this new earth we're looking forward to, that is our ultimate prize. For those who are faithful in Jesus Christ, our ultimate prize is that we will get the opportunity to live with God eternally in this new heaven, this perfect heaven, and this new earth on that perfect earth. Listen to what John says. And He who sits on the throne said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And listen to these words. He says, to those who are thirsty, I will give them water without cost from the spring of the water of life. And then he says, and those who are victorious will inherit all of this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. Now, think about those words. He's saying, it's done. When Jesus Christ died on the cross, was buried, rose again the third day, it was done. Price tag paid for. All the sin of the world, price tag has been paid for. Yes, there's sin. Yes, there's death. Yes, there's sorrow now. But there's coming a day when all of that will go away. And then he says, who gets this? He says, those who are thirsty. Here's my question for you. Are you thirsty? Are you thirsty for Christ? Are you thirsty for a new life? Are you thirsty for the things of God? He goes, and if you're thirsty, I'll give you water. Then he says, after you've taken a drink of salvation, he goes, if you're victorious, all of this is yours. You say, how much is all of this? He says, from Alpha to Omega. That's the first and the last letter in the Greek alphabet. For you and me, he'd say all of this from A to Z. What a beautiful thought. Revelation 21, it's like just getting a sneak peek of the best Christmas present you ever got, but multiply that 1 billion times over. And that's how beautiful the new heaven and the new earth will be. Thanks for joining us again.